Welcome to Handmade History.
Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Alicia.
And I'm Sonia.
And today we are talking about samplers. But first, this episode is sponsored by Embroidica. If you're drawn to craftsmanship, culture, and the stories behind what we wear, you need to know about Embroidica. Embroidica is a platform dedicated entirely to embroidery, not just as decoration, but as history, identity, and art. From techniques like goldwork to regional traditions like Indian embroidery, you'll find in-depth articles and educational content designed to inspire and inform. Embroidica.com also welcomes your contributions. If you create embroidery, study it, or simply have a story to share, whether visual or written, Embroidica welcomes you. Visit Embroidica.com, that's EMBROYDICA.com, and become part of a growing global archive of embroidery and creative expression. Thank you, Embroidica. And I actually have a blog post up on Embroidica today. I wrote an article about samplers around the world, and you can find it at Embroidica.com.
We also started a read-along last Wednesday, May 6th, of a book related to our episode about the Saturday Evening Girls and Paul Revere pottery. We are reading Jane Healy's The Saturday Evening Girls Club. It's not too late to join in. Just grab a copy of the book at your favorite bookstore or library and follow us on Patreon or social media. We'll share the links in our show notes.
And now, on to the show. A sampler is a panel of fabric that shows a variety of embroidery stitches. It can be planned or unplanned and used as a tool for practice and learning or as a tool for teaching. Samplers are found around the world in almost every different culture. In England and North America, the word sampler has come to mean a rectangle of fabric cross-stitched with a few common elements, including the alphabet or a saying, bands of border stitches, and motifs, especially of people or flowers. Today, we are going to talk about a variety of different samplers, including but not limited to these ones. The word sampler comes from the Latin word exemplum, or the Old French word exemplaire. Both mean an example. John Palsgrave, author of the Anglo-French Dictionary, which was published in 1530, defines it as an exemplar for a woman to work by. Anne Seba, author of Samplers, 5 Centuries of a Gentle Craft, writes that, quote, the accepted use of the word today is as a reference sheet for embroidery patterns or an experimental practice ground for stitches.
Cultures around the world have used samplers across time to document embroidery stitches. Though they span different cultures, these types of samplers look a lot alike. Often, they are medium to large pieces of fabric with randomly placed motifs and patterns. These were not intended to be displayed, but rather used as a reference. They are bigger than what we think of in the U.S. as a sampler today. They might be rolled up for storage. The oldest extant sampler is an example of this type. A sampler made by a member of the Nazca culture in Peru is the oldest surviving sampler. It dates to the 100s BCE. The background is made from cotton, and the thread is spun from camelid hair. It measures about 28 inches by 41 inches, or more than 2 feet by 3 feet. It is held in the Met in New York.
Despite being more than 2,000 years old, the stitched designs of the Nazca sampler are vibrant red, blue, pink, and green. Peruvians have been making and using natural dyes for thousands of years. In fact, the oldest example of indigo fabric is Peruvian, and it is more than 6,000 years old. The red thread in this sampler was likely dyed using cochineal, which Peruvians have been making since 2300 BCE, or for more than 4,000 years. The cochineal is an insect that lives on cacti. Its body can be pulverized and mixed with water and alum, which is a mineral, and citric acid. Varying the pH of the dye bath and the content of the minerals in the water can change the cochineal dye and make it varying shades of red or purple. When the Spanish conquistadors arrived, they saw the value in this dye and began exporting cochineal. It was the second most exported good after silver. By 1557, Spaniards exported more than 50,000 pounds of cochineal each year.
Cochineal remains the only natural red food dye available. Today it is called carmine, E20, or red dye number 4. It is 12 times more intense than other red dyes. Peru exports more than 420 tons of it each year, which supplies 95% of the world's cochineal. Other dyes that were probably used to make the rest of the colors in the sampler include chapi, which is related to the madder plant and used to make lighter red, choca, a leaf which makes green, and coli, a flower which makes yellow. To make the colors more vibrant, the thread is dyed unplied. The stitches in the Nazca sampler include Holbein or double running stitch. This is used to make elaborate motifs of stylized people and animals. There is also a lot of tent stitch or satin stitch. Tent stitch is done across 2 threads and used to make dense patches of color that make border designs which are complex and repeating.
The Nazca are the same cultural group that made the famous Nazca lines in the deserts of Peru. These are enormous lines, geometric shapes, and images of creatures like spiders and birds that cover over 400 miles and are visible from an airplane. There are many theories about who made these long lines and enormous shapes, how they did it, and why. In fact, they are part of the Indiana Jones movie with Shia LaBeouf, Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, which posits that aliens were involved. Other people have proposed that the lines and shapes are related to water, either above ground or underground, and an article in Archaeology magazine hypothesizes that the lines and shapes like triangles and trapezoids were paths for visiting shrines, ritual cleaning, and following water or performing rituals for water. It is still unclear why people drew creatures like spiders and birds. These complex drawings are actually made with one continuous line, so that if you walk the path, it is like walking a labyrinth.
A similar reference sample to the Nazca sampler comes from Egypt more than 1,000 years later. This sampler is held at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. It dates to the 1300s or 1400s. It is made from linen and embroidered with silk thread. It's significantly smaller than the Peruvian sampler, about 9 inches by 17 inches. It also uses mainly Holbein or double running stitch and includes numerous motifs like people, plants, and geometric designs. There are also satin stitch diamond motifs. The thread is dyed in many different shades of blue. This could be indigo dye, which was imported from India, or it could be Egyptian blue, the, quote, world's oldest synthetic pigment. Egyptian blue was made as early as 3300 BCE. The ancient Egyptian word for it was hisbit-urt, which means artificial lapis lazuli. It's made from a combination of sand, sodium carbonate or ash, and copper, minerals, or bronze shavings. This is mixed together to make a flour-like substance. This flour is rolled into balls and then cooked in a furnace. The furnace ranges from 850 to 1,000 degrees Celsius, which is more than 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. This melts the compound into a glassy blob called frit. The frit is ground up, and that makes the pigment. Egyptian blue has a unique property in that it emits near-infrared light waves, which are invisible to the human eye. Egyptian blue was used to paint pottery, statues, and fabric.
This sampler is in the Mamluk style. We discussed the Mamluks in our episode on blackwork embroidery, episode number 24. They were a fascinating group of people who ruled the Islamic Empire, and this style of embroidery evolved and influenced modern blackwork. This sampler was discovered in an Egyptian burial ground. Researchers think it may have been done by a professional, and this would make sense if the professional embroiderer was buried with a tool from their work. And it's interesting to me that the 2 oldest examples of samplers that we have both use Holbein or double running stitch heavily. Today, most cross-stitchers use backstitch for a similar effect. But as you have told me, Sonia, backstitch is a thread monster. It uses like a ton of thread.
Mm-hmm.
It takes up twice as much thread as Holbein stitch. And unlike Holbein stitch, it's not reversible.
Samplers from England, Germany, Italy, Spain, and other places have been preserved that are similar to the Peruvian and Egyptian samplers in concept. The Victoria and Albert Museum has many of these in their online collection. We'll share a link to this in our Patreon blog post. Though the motifs and colors are different, the similarities are striking across a wide variety of cultures. The images are grouped randomly wherever they fit and are not particularly organized. There are a mix of human and geometric designs. The colors are strikingly well preserved. The background is always white or off-white and undyed linen, cotton, or cotton canvas, sometimes blended with silk. There are a variety of colors, including reds, pinks, blues, greens, and yellows. Holbein stitch is often used to outline motifs. 10 stitch is used to create borders with color. There are lots of variations of counted stitches, including cross stitch. There are also samplers that show different types of drawn work, where you pull threads from the fabric to make decorative, lacy stitches.
In addition to the random motif samplers, there are samplers with patterns organized into bands. The earliest one of these at the V&A is also the oldest known sampler to include the embroiderer's name and date, and the oldest surviving British sampler. This is the Jane Bostocke sampler. The Jane Bostocke sampler was stitched by Jane Bostocke in 1598. She signed her name in backstitch or Holbein stitch outline letters, some of which she beaded with tiny white beads or pearls. She also commemorated the birth of her cousin, Alice Lee, 2 years earlier in 1596. Alice Lee and Jane Bostocke were both buried in the same village, and Bostocke may have lived with the Lee family. According to the V&A, this sampler is stitched using backstitch, but many of the designs resemble blackwork, and I think that much of it is actually done using Holbein stitch. It is about 14 inches by 17 inches, and the motifs are somewhat organized into bands across the fabric. But the bands are not uniform. One band holds multiple motifs, and they might not all be exactly the same height. The exception are the 3 lines of writing. The first line is the alphabet and Jane's name and the year 1598. The next 2 lines are the inscription about Alice Lee's birth, which reads, Alice Lee was born the 23rd of November, being Tuesday in the afternoon, 1596. The end of the second line is white space. The words are separated by asterisks. The Jane Bostocke sampler is really cool because it brings a non-famous historical person to life. Seeing Bostocke's name and the date and her inscription about Alice Lee documents her experience in a way that is uncommon for embroiderers and women. As the historian Laurel Thatcher Ulrich wrote, well-behaved women seldom make history. Bostocke was a skilled stitcher who cared about her cousin. She knew what time of day she was born. Even the way that she organized the sampler shows something of her personality and the fact that she chose to sign her name.
The banded sampler is what many people hear in the U.S. picture when you say the word sampler. There are a few lines of text, a few more lines showing motifs or images, and then maybe a more elaborate image at the top or bottom of the sampler. The oldest signed and dated banded English sampler was made by Mildred Mayau in 1633. Interestingly, it shows unpicked stitches. There are also 2 other samplers that have been found with similar motifs to Mayau's, which indicates that this was maybe a learning tool. It's possible that all 3 stitchers learned from the same teacher. Common motifs in English banded samplers included the alphabet, flowers, people, especially a figure called the boxer, which originated as a man holding out a flower to a woman.
Embroidery pattern books began to be published in the early 1500s in Western Europe. One of the first ones was Ein Nye Firmbuchling, which was published by Johann Schonsberger the Younger. It is printed with woodcuts that show an alphabet and different designs which could be stitched or used in other decorative arts. Another early title was A Skull House for the Needle by Richard Schorleicher, published in 1624. Other books were published in Italy and France. According to the V&A, in Western Europe, quote, despite increased availability of these books, most embroiderers in the 16th century would still have relied mainly on physical examples of their craft for inspiration and the transfer of specific skills.
Now we'll talk about some unique samplers. Students made map samplers as a way to practice stitches and learn geography as early as the mid-1700s in England. These maps might be local places, such as a few neighboring farms, or they might be larger, depicting a country, the world, or even a solar system. The earliest solar system sampler that we found dates to the early 1800s. These maps include labels and a key, just like printed maps. They might include latitude and longitude labels and lines, as well as details like dots on the map that mark capitals or important places. They are also often decorated with flowers, birds, and other beautiful motifs and geometric patterns. For example, one map of England has tiny embroidered ships in the ocean with satin-stitched sails. Each map reflects the embroiderer.
A Quaker school in Westchester, Pennsylvania, the Westtown School, instructed its students in how to make 3-dimensional globe samplers. The Westtown School, which was founded in 1799, centered on Quaker values. According to its website, These included plainness and simplicity, peace, integrity, and equality. The globe samplers, which are about 6 inches in diameter or a tad smaller, were made from 1800 to 1843 by girls who were required to take 6 weeks of sewing school each year. They were made from linen stuffed with raw wool and stitched with silk. As one student, Rachel Cope, wrote home in 1816, quote, "I expect to have a great deal of trouble making them, yet I hope they will recompense me for all my trouble, for they will certainly be a curiosity to you and of considerable use in instructing my brother and sisters, and to strengthen my own memory respecting the supposed shape of our earth, and the manner in which it moves or is moved on its axis, or the line drawn through it, round which it revolves every 24 hours. Each globe included stem-stitch lines showing latitude and longitude, as well as the path of the sun. Countries were outlined and labeled in ink, and sometimes they were also stitched. The labels were written in mostly plain letters, which reflects the Quaker value of simplicity. Susan Eckroyd embroidered one around 1840, and her letters were a bit more elaborate and fun. The content of the samplers reflected what each stitcher was interested in. Some were more detailed than others. These globes required sewing and embroidery knowledge, as well as a familiarity with geography and astronomy. The school itself had only 2 globes, so these handmade globe samplers were probably also helpful study tools for the makers. 42 embroidered globe samplers survive today. 5 of these globes are celestial globes, which show the locations of constellations. The constellations were painted with images as well as locations of stars. They're very cool. And students as young as 10 made them.
Another unique type of sampler is the darning sampler. These were made in Europe in countries like Belgium and the Netherlands, as well as in England and Germany and other places. The samplers are unique in that they are a series of rectangles or similar shapes, often organized in a ring or other pattern around a center motif or the stitcher's name. The girls who made these at home or in school practiced patterns of running stitches. The darning stitch patterns mimic the weave of different fabrics. They went in 2 directions, just like warp and weft threads in fabric. A typical progression of skill was to make darning samplers in 2 colors, which made it easier to spot mistakes. Then to move on to a single color. Then finally to make white-on-white darning stitches. Some darning samplers were made to show skill in darning, and others were decorative. One sampler made by an unknown stitcher in the late 1700s in England has darning stitches made in multiple colors and outlined in decorative stitches. The patterns in this sampler are elaborate and include motifs. The center has a giant floral motif, and the petals and stems are filled in with stitches similar to the darning stitches.
And we'll end with an interesting modern sampler. Aram Han Cifuentes is a modern fiber artist and educator. She immigrated to the U.S. from South Korea, and her parents were garment workers. She created the U.S. Citizen Test Sampler Project in 2012, when she began stitching the 100 questions on the U.S. citizenship test. Each question takes her more than 4 hours to stitch. Cifuentes has since expanded the project to include other non-U.S. citizens. She does workshops around the country. People stitch up one question and answer and add their name and the date. Sometimes they embellish their sampler with more stitches or a patch or even a photo. Cifuentes then puts these samplers for sale on her website. Each one costs the amount of money it takes to apply for citizenship, $760, and the artist who makes them receives the full amount. Cifuentes has done the citizenship test sampler workshops at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, the Museum of Fine Arts in Philadelphia, and at museums and schools in Chicago, Seattle, Washington, D.C., and Asheville, North Carolina. The following comes from the artist's statement on her website. Quote, "Through participatory projects, Cifuentes interrogates the structures that shape civic life, immigration systems, bureaucracies, and electoral processes, reworking, reimagining, and at times dismantling them altogether. She creates active environments grounded in safety, play, and skill sharing, where collective art making moves participants toward collective action." About the Citizenship Test Sampler Project, she says, I use samplers to engage with the social and collective nature of needlework's history, as well as to exhibit the value of non-citizen communities. And that is a tour of some interesting samplers from around the world and their makers. Sonia, what do you think?
I thought that was super interesting because like samplers are also like probably one of the first introductions that I had to like embroidery. Like that's kind of the first artwork you would see would be samplers.
Our mom also made a lot of samplers.
Yeah, so we had them in our house.
Yeah,
And
very
so
great.
yeah, and so it's cool then to read more about it. But like the older ones are like diaries almost, like the woman writing about her cousin's birth and everything, which I didn't think of them like that, but that's cool.
Yeah, I found that one to be like so heartwarming. The Jane Bostocke sampler just really brought her to life.
Mm-hmm. I also really want to see the globe ones because I like never even thought about 3D samplers. That's cool.
Yeah, they're very cool. I really enjoyed the girl writing home being like, this is going to be a real hassle, but it's going to be worth it. And also how she said supposed shape of the earth. Like, supposedly it's this ball.
Well, yeah, we'll have to go to the one at the Met now.
We'll have to go to the one at the Met, see the Nazca lines. I also would like to go to the Victoria and Albert where they just have like hundreds of.
So, Victoria Albert, again, so many of the things we talked about at the beginning.
We should do an episode on them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why are they obsessed with it?
We should go then. We should just go check it out.
Field trip episode.
Has to happen.
From your lips to God's ears. Well, thank you so much for listening. Thank you to Embroidica for sponsoring this episode. Visit embroidica.com and become part of a growing global archive of embroidery and creative expression. And check out my blog post on there.
We hope you are enjoying the Saturday Evening Girls Club by Jane Healy if you are reading along with us. Stay tuned for a special bonus episode with Jane.
If you have a question or a comment or a suggestion for a future episode, you can email us at handmadehistoryhosts, that's HOSTS, @gmail.com, or visit our website at handmadehistorypodcast.com.
And sign up for our Patreon post to get links, photos, and more at patreon.com/handmadehistorypodcast.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Oh boy.
Okay.